So good evening, everybody. Welcome to Adventures with Tea from Your Garden. My name is Judith Taylor, and my company is called Seeds to Plate. My mission is to help people learn how to garden and especially how to grow their own food. Eating locally grown organic fruits and vegetables and herbs is a great way to improve your health, which is why I'm so passionate about it. I teach lots of different gardening related topics, and I also do consulting in your garden to help you solve problems, design your dream garden, or determine what kinds of plants you can grow. I also have an online shop where you can buy organically grown dried herbs and tea blends. So I hope you're going to go check that out after our class. I have more than 30 years and counting of hands-on gardening experience, and I just graduated from University of Massachusetts Green School, which is for horticultural professionals. And it was an awesome class, and I learned tons of stuff, and I just can't wait to share it with all of you. So give me a call if you need some help. For tonight, I want you to all sit back and relax as we talk about tea, because drinking tea is the best way I know of to relax. So based on the chat, we've got a lot of tea drinkers online, which is great. And you're actually in good company because there's lots of people who enjoy tea, and I call them the teetotalers. So we've got quite a few teetotalers out there. The first one is Frances Hardinge. She's a British woman who writes children's books, and she says that tea is the magic key to the vault where my brain is kept. And I relate to this because just like the person we talked to earlier who has black tea in the morning to get things started, I have to have my black tea and my caffeine in order to get my brain working. Then we've got this fellow that some of you may recognize, Mr. Grant. He says he frequently dreams of having tea with the Queen. I too would love to have tea with the Queen of England. Then we've got the Eleanor Roosevelt quote, which some of you may have heard before. This is one of my favorite quotes. It says, "A woman is like a tea bag. You can't tell how strong she is until you put her in hot water." I think that's a great quote. And then we've got Mick Jagger here, who's also a tea drinker. He says he's got nasty habits and he takes tea at 3. He hasn't aged quite as well as Hugh Grant. And then I found this cute little quote that I think sums up what we're trying to do today. It says, "You can't buy happiness, but you can buy tea." And that's kind of the same thing. And I've actually adjusted it a little bit for our specific program that you can grow your own tea. And that's kind of the same thing. So I'm hoping that this presentation tonight will bring you a little bit of happiness because right now we could all use some. Let's talk about some tea fun facts. Basically, tea is probably one of the oldest flavored beverages ever, as you saw in the video. It's basically the most consumed other than water. 80% of US households have tea in the kitchen, and according to the statistics from the Tea Drinkers Association, 50% of the US population claims to drink tea daily. Now, as I said, these statistics are from the Tea Drinkers Association, so you're gonna have to take them with a grain of salt or a cup of tea. The tea itself, black tea and green tea and all those other teas that are not herbal teas, are derived from the Camellia sinensis plant. That is a plant that is native to East Asia. And it's, as you saw, they transferred it, they smuggled it to India to try and spread its growing area. Today, it's cultivated across the world in both tropical and subtropical regions. Unfortunately, it doesn't grow up here in New England, but there is a tea plantation near South Carolina in the US. I think it's the only one. I did have the privilege of visiting this tea plantation several years ago in Charleston, South Carolina. As I mentioned, it's the only one in the US, and they grow private label tea as well as teas for Bigelow, which you've probably all heard of. The most interesting thing for me was this crazy looking contraption you see here, the red thing that's harvesting the tea leaves. For those of you who aren't familiar with tea plants, they grow kind of like a boxwood shrub, and they have very tiny leaves on them, and they grow on hedges. And so they plant them in these long lines, like you see in the picture, with space in between. And then this tea picker goes down between the hedges, and it clips off just the top inch or two of those leaves every couple of weeks. And those are the tea leaves that are used for your tea that go into your Bigelow bags. Some tea terms would be helpful to make sure we all understand what I'm talking about as we go through this. Some key terms that you may or may not have heard of before. One, obviously, you've heard of is tea. The definition of tea, official definition, is a beverage made from that Camellia sinensis plant or shrub. Okay, it is caffeinated or it can be decaffeinated, but it's basically tea. Tisane is just a fancy word. It's a fancy French word for an herbal infusion. The infusion is a drink, a remedy, or an extract that's prepared by soaking the leaves of a plant or herb in a liquid. Steeping is a verb, and that is the act of soaking in water or other liquids so as to take the flavor out of whatever you put in there. So if you put leaves or roots or something into water, the steeping process will extract those vitamins and minerals you're looking for. And then last but not least, we have this thing called a decoction. You may not have heard of this before. If you have, you weren't sure what it was. Basically, a decoction is similar to an infusion, but it's more intense. So you're going to be boiling something or simmering something for several minutes, probably up to 5 minutes, and then you're going to let it steep for 10 or 15. You use this process for things like bark or roots or plants with thick, waxy leaves. Since they are thicker and it's harder to get those minerals and nutrients out of the plant material that you're looking for, you need to use this more intense process than if you were just going to put some leaves from lemon balm or something in some water. Okay, so there's lots of benefits for drinking tea. As in addition to the good taste, we all like to drink tea apparently. So why is it that we drink it? Well, one of them is because there's health reasons. Many herbs are medicinal in nature, and so fusing them into a tisane is a great way to ingest them. Drinking herbal tea is also a really good way just to stay hydrated. There are ceremonial aspects to it. You're all familiar with the Japanese tea ceremony, which is a very choreographed and intricate set of steps and movements for making and serving tea. It's also a beverage for all seasons. During the winter, I drink tons of tea just to stay warm here in cold New England. And during the summer, I drink iced tea to keep me cool in hot New England. And then last but not least, of course, we have the high tea with the queen, which we would all love to probably partake in sometime. When she stops by, we should be prepared with our signature tea blend to offer her. Now, before we get into the nuts and bolts of making tea, I need to give you a word from my lawyer. Basically, we need to be really careful with it, as with anything else. Herbs are fairly safe, and the ones I'm going to talk about today are really safe, but you want to make sure you consult with a physician before consuming any herbs or plant materials. Some plants may be contraindicated with prescription medications if you're taking any, or if you have any physical or chronic conditions, they may irritate that. So you definitely would want to check before you consume any amount of them. Second thing is be sure to try small amounts first of any kind of herb. If you're going to start drinking it or eating it, you want to try small quantities first just to make sure you're not allergic to it or you're not sensitive to it. Third, do not consume any plant materials unless you can positively identify it and know that it's non-toxic. There are toxic plants out there, even like a tomato plant, which is part of the nightshade family. There's a reason they call it nightshade. It's because it has toxic chemicals in it. So you don't want to eat tomato plants, not that you would, but there are other plants out there too that could be dangerous. There's not a lot of them, but it's good to know which ones are safe and which ones are not. That's why one of the reasons I like to grow my own plants and plant them in my yard, because I know exactly what it is and that it's safe and I don't have to worry about it. But if you're out foraging, make sure you can identify those. And then last but not least, research any plants that you plan to use for tea to ensure that you know what the effects are and the proper way to prepare them. You want to be able to get the most medicinal and nutrient value out of them. So you might need to do a decoction versus just an infusion based on what we just talked about. So it's helpful to know that kind of information. And most importantly, just remember that moderation is key, okay? If you do want to use herbs for curing any kind of illness or chronic conditions you might have, I certainly recommend contacting or consulting with an herbalist for recommendations and dosages. I don't have that background. I've been trying to learn more about herbalism, and it's a very intricate science in itself. And there are people out there who know how to use it and are very adept at it and knowledgeable about it. So I would highly recommend talking to them if you want to get really serious about taking large volumes of anything. Okay, so now that we've got that underway, let's discuss the best way to prepare for the Queen's visit. We'll start by reviewing different types of teas. the different ingredients that can be used, how we prepare them, how we blend them, brew them, and finally serve them. And keep in mind that I'm going to give you guidelines, not rules. Okay, I'm a no rules gardener and a no rules tea brewer. These are just guidelines to get you started. Teas can be configured to your own personal tastes, so don't just drink what's in the bag from the store. Explore. Add some new flavors to the bags you're already using, or you can start from scratch with herbs that you find pleasing. So first of all, let's review the types of teas again very briefly. We talked a little bit about the black tea that are leaves of Camellia sinensis. Those are basically processed. So after they pick them with that silly looking picker that I showed you, what they do is they wilt them, they oxidize them, they do all these crazy things to them, and that's how they get the black tea. It's the level of oxidization that creates the black tea. Green tea are basically the same leaves. They just haven't been oxidized as much. And then there's all kinds of levels in between the two, again, depending on the oxidation. Some of the tea flavors are also impacted in where they're grown, different if they're grown in the mountains versus a valley versus high humidity, low humidity. And then there's also different varieties and strains of the Camellia sinensis plant that are grown that could also impact the taste. But basically black and green tea, they're not different types of plants. They're the same plant. They're just oxidized for a different amount of time. The third category is the one we're going to spend the most time on tonight. Those are the herbal and medicinal teas. Those are flowers, leaves, roots, or seeds of various plants. And there's tons and tons of plants that can be used. And because there are so many plants, I could be here all night talking about them. So what we're going to do is focus on one family. And I'm going to talk about the mint family because most of you already have plants growing in your yard that are in the mint family. You may or may not know it. But like I said, mint is a very prevalent type of plant. It's very safe and it has a lot of medicinal as well as antibacterial, antimicrobial properties, and it tastes good. If you don't have any of these plants in your yard yet, let me know and I will help you find some because there are tons of them. Depending on the plant and what you're trying to accomplish, you can use the flowers, the leaves, the seeds, the root, or sometimes the entire plant for your tea mixture. Okay, so you can meet the Lamiaceae family. Let's try and say that 3 times really fast. These are the mints. They have over 200 genera and 7,000 species. So like I mentioned, there's a lot of them. Most of them can be identified by a square stem. So if you reach in between the leaves and feel that stem, you're going to feel 4 sides on them. It's pretty straightforward. You'll see them if you start looking. You'll be amazed. It's like, oh, that's a mint. It's really easy to identify. The leaves are opposite each other and they alternate direction, and then they typically get smaller as they go higher on the plant. They generally have very tiny flowers, and it's a 5-petaled flower, 2 up and 3 down. And the flowers are arranged in whorls or clusters at the base of the leaves or at the end on spikes. And then the one thing, other than the square stems, it's really easy to identify mints is their strong aroma. Most of them are very fragrant. And if you brush up against the leaves or crush them in your hand, they'll be very aromatic and you'll say, oh yeah, this is mint. I recognize this. So a few ingredients from the mint family that, again, you probably are familiar with, but maybe you didn't know they were mint. The first one is basil. Basil has, just the basil family itself has a whole bunch of different varieties. This summer alone, I grew sweet basil, holy basil, lemon drop basil, lime basil, cinnamon basil, and blue spice basil in my garden. And they can all be used in herbal teas. And the reason I picked them was to just experiment and try some different flavors. So that's what I'll be doing this winter, is trying to mix and match my basils. Bee balm, which is also known as bergamot, is a plant that you can use either the flower or the leaves in, and it has a very strong minty kind of smell. And there's lots of different kinds of those. Catnip and catmint, 2 different plants, but similar characteristics and similar aroma and fragrance. Again, part of the mint family. Anise hyssop has a nice licoricey. If you like black licorice or the anise flavor, hyssop is very nice. Everyone's probably familiar with lavender. The lemon balm is one that we mentioned before. That grows very readily up here in New England and doesn't spread quite as aggressively as the regular mint. So it's okay to put in the ground. At least I've had really good luck with it. Very good for tea, hot or cold. I use it all the time. The regular mints, like spearmint, peppermint, sweet mint, chocolate mint, again, those you got to be careful with because they do spread and they will take over your garden, but they are delicious in tea, both hot and cold. The rest of them on the list are probably ones that you have in your spice cabinet. These are all typically used for culinary purposes, the marjoram, oregano, rosemary, sage, savory, and thyme, but they can also be used for tea, and they also have medicinal value. So some of the medicinal benefits of mints, I mean, there's a whole lot of them, but to kind of simplify things a little bit, I tried to organize them into 4 different categories. So the first one is the nervine. These are for nervous system complaints, things like anxiety. We don't have any of that today. Things like depression, don't have any of that either. Headaches, insomnia, dementia, all those sorts of things. Mints are good for trying to relieve those and kind of just relax you and make you feel a little bit more at peace. The second category is digestive. So if you have digestive system complaints like indigestion, gas, cramps, nausea, or colic, you might want to try some mints, one of the mint family in a tisane to try and calm some of your indigestion. As I mentioned before, they also have antimicrobial effects. So any kind of infection, whether it's bacterial, viral, or fungal, they can all be potentially helped or reduced with a mint family. And some of this stuff has had research done on it. I don't know how much, but these things have been proven research. You do have to be careful when looking at medicinal things online because there's tons of stuff out there. A lot of it is not proven, but if you research the right sites, you'll find some data and some research. The last category is for clearing the respiratory system. So things like infections, congestion, or asthma. I'm sure you've all probably smelled like lavender or mint in a steam, and it just seems to clear out your sinuses and makes you breathe easier. So these are all good benefits, medicinal benefits of mints. And you must wonder, how do they do that? How does something like a plant do all this stuff? Well, the answer is in the volatile oils that they contain. They have things like menthol and thymol and citronal and all these things I've never even heard of, but these are all things that react with your body's systems to try and relieve your symptoms. So specifically, one of the things they do is they relax tension and spasm in our internal organs. They can create a sense of harmony and well-being. They can kill those microorganisms that get into your system, like bacteria, viruses, and fungi. And even back in the Middle Ages, grave robbers used these things during the bubonic plague to protect themselves from infection. So even though modern science is just trying to do some research on this stuff and is just getting the tip of the iceberg of what these herbs can do, there have been lots and lots of different different generations that have used these herbs for medicinal purposes and use them effectively. We just are catching on now. So now modern day research has actually substantiated the use for colds, flu, bronchitis, pneumonia, and the herpes simplex. But wait, there's more. So there's also nutritional value. And again, because there's a lack of a lot of evidence and data and hard research for the medicinal impacts of these herbs, I try to focus on the nutritional value because these are proven. We know that this exists. So if for nothing else, you have a cup of tea and enjoy it, but oh, by the way, you can get the side nutritional value while you're in it. So for example, here we've got 1/3 of a cup of spearmint. And I mean, you don't eat typically 1/3 of a cup. It's really not that much. If it's fresh, 1/3 of a cup is not very much at all. It only has 6 calories in it, which is great. It has a gram of fiber. It has 12% of the recommended daily intake of vitamin A, 9% of iron, 8% of manganese, and 4% of folate. So it's certainly not going to cover all your daily recommended dosages, but it's certainly going to enhance your diet. And most of us do need, more minerals and vitamins in our diet. We can always use more. And I feel that taking them through natural plant materials, the body can actually absorb them better than taking them in capsules and other methods like that. So I try to get mine in some of my tea. Okay, now that we've selected our ingredients, let's move on to preparing them. The three most important things to know while you're preparing your ingredients are, first of all, when to harvest. If you're not going to use the fresh product or the fresh mints, then how do you preserve them for later? And then how do you store them to preserve the flavor and those medicinal benefits? So first of all, the harvesting. The leaves and flowers should be harvested before they go to seed when the flavors are the strongest. Okay, so theoretically, that's the perfect time. But you know what? This is no rules gardening, no rules tea making. So you just do it whenever you have time. Honestly, people get busy. We all get busy. If you miss that window, don't worry about it. They still are healthy. They still taste good. So get it when you can and just be okay with it. Make a note to maybe do it better next time, but don't worry about it. It's fine. It's better to get something than nothing because you missed the window. Also, seeds and roots can be harvested at the end of the season for the plant. So if you got to wait till the plant goes to seed, obviously, some of those things happen earlier in the season than later. And then the roots, the same thing. Dandelion roots, you can harvest in the spring because the dandelions are up and you're pulling them out of the yard anyway. Why not save them for tea? As long as you don't spray your pesticides on your lawn. Okay, so dehydrating, we've got several different options for dehydrating. You might want to use your ingredients fresh, and you're certainly welcome to, and I would certainly recommend it. Sometimes there's more nutrients in the fresh because some of them may kind of disappear or desiccate when you dehydrate. If you can use them fresh, then do. But you want to save some for the winter. So you should dehydrate. Air drying works well for most mints. It's very easy to do. You can put them on a cookie tray with a piece of paper towel or something absorbent underneath it, or you can hang them up in this little picture here. Just put them in little bunches on a piece of string and hang them in your basement or in a shaded area outside, and they'll dry and they'll be just fine. As long as there's adequate air movement so they don't mold or get mildewy, they'll be just fine. Herbs and washing them before dehydrating is kind of a controversial topic. Most places say not to wash them. Personally, I wash mine because I don't want all the dust and pollen and all the stuff from the environment that's out there on my herbs. So I do give them a rinse before I dry them. I'll put them in a colander or a salad spinner to get the extra water off, and then I'll spread them out to dry. And before I put them in the dehydrator, I usually wait till they have air dried, just so there's not extra water. I guess the reason for saying not to wash your herbs is because it extends the drying time, which leads to the deterioration of those flavors and oils that are in the herbs. But again, if it's completely a personal decision, I prefer not to have all that extra stuff on my herbs, so I rinse them. You can also dry them in the oven. You can put your oven on the lowest setting, usually around between 140 and 170, depending on how low your oven goes. You can put them in the oven and then just mix them around every 20 to 30 minutes to ensure even drying. When they're crunchy and they turn to dust in your hand, then they're dry. The microwave is another way to dry herbs, and I have tried this. It's actually a very fast and easy way to do it, but you got to be really careful. It's good for small batches. But I also recommend standing there and watching it because it's very easy to start a fire. I've done it several times. I don't know why, but for some reason, like the third time when you do the batch, something sparks. I usually put it on a paper towel on a plate, and the first couple times it works great. And then by the third time, I don't know if the plate's getting hot or there's not enough moisture in there that's left or what happens, but flames will start shooting up. So be very careful. You may want to let your container cool off in between batches, just so it doesn't get hot and maybe it won't flame. Don't want to start any fires. The best method is probably getting a dehydrator if you're going to do any kind of volume. They're really good for long periods of low heat, and they work great for drying herbs. And I'll show you a couple samples here. They cost anywhere from $35 to $300, depending on how sophisticated you want to get. I've got a real basic one that just has a heating element in the bottom and trays that go up, and I have to hand turn the trays to make sure they're drying evenly and then rotate them, but it works perfectly fine. I also have a fancy one now that Santa brought me that has a fan in the back, and I can set the temperature, and it has a timer on it, which is great because I always forget to turn my other one off. So like I said, you've got the gamut there of what you want to buy. And the key features you want to focus on is the air circulation and whether there's a fan or not. That is very helpful. And then any kind of temperature control. If you're just doing leaves and herbs all the time, you probably don't need to change the temperature. But if you're going to do beef jerky and fruit and tomatoes and things like that, you probably want the temperature control. Storage. Storage options are many. I'm a big recycler, so I try to find stuff around the house that I can use. I have these little plastic things that I think potato salad and coleslaw comes in from the grocery store. It's got a plastic top. They're washable in the dishwasher, and I just label them and put my herbs in them. Again, other plastic containers, these glass containers with the rubberized top have a nice seal, work really well. So anything you've got around home is great. Glass or plastic doesn't matter. You want it airtight. That's the most important thing. If it is a clear container, you want to put it in a dark, dry space with a consistent temperature that's away from moisture and other odors. Ziploc baggies work just fine too. You might want to double bag them just to make sure that the odor doesn't transfer in between your herbs. And then you can put desiccant packages in them. You want to make sure those herbs are bone dry before you put them in any kind of airtight container. I tried to dry lemongrass last year and I had it in an airtight container and it wasn't quite dry. It's a little bit thicker than a lot of other herbs are, and it ended up molding. So you want to make sure that all the moisture's out of there that you can get out of there. And then those little desiccant packages that you find in your pants pocket or your coat when you buy something new at the store, those are great. They work fine. Just throw one of those in. You could put a little bag of rice in there maybe, or other things to pull the moisture out, but just make sure you get that moisture out. You can also put herbs in the freezer, whether they're dried or fresh. There's different ways to store them in the freezer. If you want to keep them fresh, you can put them in ice cubes. Some people will put them in oil or vinegar. So those are also good ways to preserve them. All right, we're going to move on to blending now. This is where the fun really starts. And I know you guys are probably wondering, when am I going to get to have my tea? Real soon. We're almost there, I promise. The proportions. So the rule of thumb is for 1 cup of water, you use 1 to 2 teaspoons of seeds or leaves or whatever your dried ingredients are. Or if you're using fresh, you use 1 to 2 tablespoons. So note there, it's like a 1 to 3 ratio of dried to fresh. Okay, so a teaspoon, 3 teaspoons equals 1 tablespoon. So it's a 1 to 3 ratio. So we're going to start with a simple, what we call a simple tea tonight, which is just 1 herb by itself. And I think that's a good way to start off because you get to experience the flavor and the personality of 1 herb without confusing it with other ones. So you're not sure what you're tasting. So basically we'll take like probably 1 teaspoon, depending on your cup size, and depending on how strong you like things, and depending on how fine the leaf is cut, that's where it really varies. So you'll just kind of have to experiment a little bit and see what works for you. If you're making a whole pot of tea as opposed to 1 cup, you'll use 1 teaspoon of dried or 1 tablespoon of fresh per cup that you're going to serve. And then you're supposed to add 1 to the pot. Okay, so one of the comments I wanted to make, as I mentioned, it depends on the fineness of the tea as far as how much you put in there. As I've been filling tea bags and I was making the tea kits for the library and making my little teas and herbs that I'm selling online now, I measure all these out because if you have whole leaves versus powder, the volume is significantly different. So if you're using teaspoons and tablespoons to measure, which is a volume measurement, it's going to be a lot different depending on how large the individual pieces of your herb are. So you might want to weigh it, but I mean, most of us don't have a scale handy to do that. So you'll just kind of have to eyeball it, but just keep in mind that if you're using big chunks of something, a teaspoon is not going to be as much as if it's powdered, and a teaspoon is going to be like probably 3 times as much. So again, something to think about. So now it's time for our tea break. So now that you know the rule of thumb of making a simple, try it out. Try the Tulsi, if you will, because that's the single one, or if you have something else, try 1 ingredient. If you don't have the kit, try something from your your culinary cabinet. Try some cinnamon or some cloves or some ginger or anything that sounds yummy to you. Just put about a teaspoonful into your cup. If you have those fillable tea bags, like I put in the kit, you can just take the teaspoon. I have one of these little handy teaspoons, and I just scoop it out and fill up the bag, pull the string, and then you can put it in your cup of tea with the hot water. Now, you're probably going to want to, I should talk about the temperature for the water. You should have it at boiling, and you probably want to let it steep for 10 or so minutes. If herbal tea takes a little bit longer to steep than black tea, so taste it somewhere along the way, and if it's not strong enough, just let it steep some more. I also suggested tasting it straight first, and then if you want a sweetener of some sort, like sugar or milk, add the other ingredients after it. You really should taste experience the flavor of that tulsi by itself, or that other herb by itself, before you add anything else. Okay, so now that we've got all this other stuff out of the way, we tried our simple, we know what flavors we like. How do we blend? This was always the big question. This has been my challenge too. It's like, where do I start in blending? And honestly, there's really no rules again, and there's no one way to do it. You really kind of just need to practice, to play around and experiment. So I found this tea blending triangle that you can reference, and it kind of gives you an idea of how most herbalists set up the tea blends that they make. So as you'll see on the triangle at the bottom, there's an active herbal action. So the way it works is the herbal action is something that you need. If you need immune support, if you need a calming effect, if you need a digestive stimulant, that's where you pick your herb based on that active ingredient. So for example, if you say you're trying to strengthen your bones, the nettle is really good for that. So the nettle is showing up there in the active. And by the way, these herbs can appear in any one of these parts of the triangle. They're not like relegated to only one certain part. You can mix and match them and move them around depending on what you're trying to do. That's why I want to say it's experimental. It's whatever works for you. The second part is the supportive ingredient. And so that's something that's supposed to be soothing to that particular body system. So again, if you're trying to say strengthen your bones, or maybe you're trying to improve your immunity because of COVID, rose hips have a lot of vitamin C in them. So that'd be a good place to put in for your supporting category. And then the final ingredient, the catalyst, adds the flavor. It's just a pop of flavor, or maybe even stronger potency to whatever active ingredient you're providing in the complementary action. So the first two. So for example, lemon peel, again, is going to have a lot of vitamin C in it. So again, if you're working on your immunity, lemon peel would be a great addition. And oh, by the way, it tastes really good. Lavender is typically in that top level because you can't really put a lot of lavender in tea. It's a little overwhelming. Typically, you just want a hint of lavender. At least that's what I found. So that tends to be at the top. Anything that's really strong, like that nutmeg, is probably something that belongs at the top. It's just that hint of flavor to kind of either offset some of the bitterness of the other herbs that are providing the medicinal value, or just giving it flavor at all. Because some of these things don't have a lot of flavor, like the nettle. It really doesn't have much flavor at all, but it's very healthy for you. So you could put in some of those other things like the orange peel or the ginger root to give it some better taste. So we talked about the mints. There are, like, as I mentioned, tons of other things that you can probably find in your garden that you can also make tea from. Things like chamomile flowers. You probably all had chamomile tea. Hibiscus flowers, lemongrass, hops. This is one of the ones I grow in my yard, and it makes amazing tea. It's a sedative, and it will help you sleep. And that's one of the things I put in the bedtime tea, if you'll notice at the ingredients. Things like dill leaves, angelica, coriander seeds, fennel seeds, all kinds of things. Somebody mentioned they're drinking strawberry tea, the raspberry leaves we talked about. I don't know if you're familiar with borage. It's an edible plant with beautiful purple bluish flowers that you can eat the flowers, make tea out of them. Rosemary tea. Did anybody think of making tea from rosemary? That's not something we typically do, but it's quite delicious. And then dandelion root. You could actually make it from the flower or the root. And then last but not least, clover. We have tons of clover in our yard, and you probably have quite a bit too. It can be used for tea. I saved this because we have rabbits all over the place. And now I know why. It's because they're out in the yard having tea. So you can basically harvest the clover leaves, the flowers right out of your yard, but I will caution you that it does take a lot of time. It's a very slow process. I tried it and I was out there for half an hour or something, popping all the white flower heads off, and ended up with a little itty bitty handful by the time I was done and dehydrated them. So anyway, you can do it, but be prepared to spend the afternoon harvesting. Anytime you do get something out of your yard or your garden, make sure that you're not using pesticides and that there's no flavoring from pets. Anything you are foraging out in other people's yards or in wild lands, woods, whatever, or in your own yard, just make sure that what you are picking does not have any kind of sprayed pesticides or fertilizer or any kind of unorganic materials on it, and that pets haven't been by there. Now, we haven't talked much about sweeteners yet. I typically drink my tea without sweeteners, but I tried the bedtime tea the other night and found the hops in it, which is, again, part of the reason why it's a bedtime tea. I found those to be quite bitter. So you may want to add some sweetness to offset the bitterness. Again, you're trying to get the nutritional or the other effects that you might want the bitter, but if you maybe don't enjoy it, adding a little bit of sweetener may help. There's lots of options here. The first one is stevia. I don't know, I think most people are familiar with stevia now, but I don't know if you know you can grow it. It's an annual up here in New England, but I usually have it in a pot. And so I can bring it indoors and it overwinters inside, then it goes back out in the spring. It's very easy to grow. It's not easy to grow from seed, but it's very easy to grow from cuttings. So I would highly recommend maybe trying to grow some stevia, because then you can just pick off the leaf and throw it in your cup and instant sweetness. You can also use raw honey. It goes well with anything. Maple syrup goes really well with lemon tea, rooibos tea, oolong milk tea, and unflavored black tea. Rock sugar is a nice option because it really doesn't change the flavor of your tea at all. Agave nectar, if any of you have tried that, does have a little bit of a flavor to it. It tastes kind of molasses and honey-like, and it does go well with strong teas or iced teas. And then there's things like coconut sugar, which I've never actually seen, but I haven't looked for it either. It's supposed to be a flavor similar to that of brown sugar. It's also supposed to be lower on the glycemic index. So if you have any kind of diabetic issues, that might be an option for you. Coconut oil is supposed to be a good match for green teas. And then, of course, there's our good old sugar. Let's talk about actually brewing and tasting. This is the fun part, right? So we talked a little bit about steeping. It's important to use boiling water. Okay, so it needs to be 212 degrees. You can use that with a kettle. I have gotten quite addicted. I've got a kettle here that actually just broke last night, believe it or not. So now I have to replace it, but it's because it's leaking. But these are great because they're electric. You just fill it up, push the button down, and then it turns off automatically when it hits boiling. So you know your water is always the right temperature. Then you've got the stovetop kettle, which you're probably all familiar with. And then there you have microwave kettles as well. So this is kind of a little fancy gadget that I'm not real familiar with. I've never tried one, but this is specifically for microwaving. So I'm not sure if it controls the temperature or not. That's the important thing. There's a lot of people who look down their nose at anyone who makes tea in the microwave. I'm guilty of microwave tea making. And I couldn't figure out what the problem was, why that's frowned upon. And then I did a little bit of research, and there was an article in the Smithsonian Magazine that was talking about tea requiring boiling water, or a certain temperature anyway, depending on what kind it was. And the herbal tea requires boiling. And when you put your mug in the microwave, you really don't know how hot the water is or how hot it gets. And the tea kettles are designed to heat tea specifically to 212. So that's the difference. And it's true because I put a mug in the microwave today since my kettle broke, and I pulled it out and it wasn't hot enough. I'm used to having it boiling all the time. So now I know what it is, and it wasn't what I wanted it to be. So you can microwave it, it's fine, but just be prepared to figure out exactly what that time is that you need in order to get it to boiling. Okay, so the second thing now is the part of the herb that's being used is going to play a role in how the tea is prepared. So the leaves and flowers are going to need an infusion. Okay, we talked about that earlier. And then if you're going to do roots and the bark and anything leathery, and maybe even seeds if they have an outside hard outside coating on them, they're going to require the decoction. So you're going to have to actually boil that for 2 to 5 minutes and then steep it for an additional 10 to 15 in order to get those flavors and volatile oils out of them. While you're preparing them, you want to make sure you keep a lid on your container. A lot of people, have an open cup and it's steeping, and it smells really good, but your volatile oils are escaping. So if you want to contain those, put a lid on it and keep those volatile oils in there. So when you drink it, you'll be able to consume those. Basically, if you can smell the aroma, those volatile oils are escaping. Some options for containing the leaves while steeping. There's lots of them. Basically, I recommend something with a very fine mesh to prevent any fine cut leaves from passing through. If a lot of those tea bags that you buy at the store, I call it tea dust because it's literally dust. It's blended so fine. If you put that in some of these strainers, it would just go right through and not do any good. Basically, prices range from $2 for a tea ball similar to this to one of these. I'm not sure. It's just an infuser that sits on top of your cup. This is one of my favorites. I use this one all the time. When we were talking about reusable tea bags earlier, this came to mind. This is a silicone one, so it's reusable. The thing I would caution you about is the ease of filling and then the ease of cleaning. So before you spend any money on one of these things, think about how easy it's going to be to fill, because some of these are not easy to fill. This one does not look particularly easy depending on how wide it opens at the top. And then getting the tea leaves once they're wet and sticking to the side, how easy are they to get out? If it's hard, you're probably going to use it once and then never use it again. The one on the left, the one with the black edging on it that I said was my favorite, that's super easy to clean. You just put your teaspoon in there to fill it, and then you can even put it in the dishwasher to clean it if you need to. So it's super, super easy. There's also things like this tea press that are on the more expensive side. There's probably more like $25 for that, but it also works. You can put your tea in with the hot water and then you press it down and there's a little spout at the top. You pour the tea off. Now, two of my favorites, I thought these were so cute. I actually have Fred here with me tonight. He's checking us out. We've got the scuba diver who has a little floaty device to put them on. So when your tea leaves are wet and draining, you don't get it all over the counter. You can put them on his little floaty device there. And then Mr. Fred, I mean, he's so cute. How can you just not laugh when you see that? Basically, you're going to put your strainer, whichever kind you use, in the cup for about 15 minutes, and then you'll pull it out or strain it out depending on what method you're using. And as I mentioned, herbal teas tend to take longer to steep than black teas. And so if your herbal tea is too weak, either steep it longer or add more herbs. And be sure the water's hot enough. So there's all kinds of options for teapots as well, and cups. So you can pick your style to make some tea. So you can serve them hot, cold, or at room temperature. If you're heating them up, a little tea set like this would be nice. If you're going to have tea with the queen, I would recommend the royal china, such as this. Or if you're going to do iced tea, something simple like the clear pitcher and cup work well. If you are making iced tea, keep in mind that you should make your tea stronger, because if you're pouring it over ice, that's going to dilute it. And then don't forget to keep your pinky up. So now you are ready for tea with Queen. She was supposed to be here tonight, but because of the COVID restrictions, she couldn't be with us. So she said to please have a cuppa on her behalf. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So let's taste another kind of tea. We tried the Tulsi, and for those of you that have the Tulsi, I wanted to let you know it is caffeine free, like we talked about earlier. It has vitamin C and zinc in it. It's used as an immunity booster, and it helps prevent infections along with possessing antibacterial, antiviral, and antifungal properties. It's known as an adaptogen, which is a lot of plants have adaptogen qualities, they're basically marketed as helping the body resist stressors of all kinds, whether they're physical or chemical or biological. They've been used for centuries in Chinese and Ayurvedic healing traditions. So again, some of the research has been done, some not, but again, it's been used forever by a lot of different cultures. So that's the Tulsi. Okay, the afternoon tea recipe, which is the second one in your little packet that you got, has raspberry leaf, mint, and nettle in it. Now, these tea blends that I made for you, I just use equal parts because I wanted you to kind of get a sense of all the different flavors. But this is where the personal preference comes in. If you taste something in here that you really like, and if you're going to do your own blend, you might want to amp that one up a little bit. Like if you like the mint and you really like things minty, then I would probably double the mint and just leave the raspberry leaf and the nettle alone. The reason I picked these three for the afternoon tea, first of all, the mint, the aroma stimulates your brain as well as adds iron, manganese, folate, and vitamin A to your diet. So if you're working and you have a little bit of an afternoon slump, that mint will try to energize you and get some brain power going. The nettle contains minerals for bone health, as well as hair and teeth and nails, all those things that need vitamins and minerals to be strong. And then the raspberry leaf has magnesium, calcium, potassium, and antioxidants in it. So you can't go wrong with that. I found the raspberry leaf doesn't have a lot of flavor. It adds a lot of bulk and volume. And so, and the nettle's the same way. So it's really the mint that should carry the flavor of the tea. And this afternoon tea is what I'm drinking now because I didn't think it would be good for the bedtime tea for me because I might fall asleep on all of you. As far as the directions for making this, you want to take that tablespoon probably of the tea blend, again, depending on how big of a cup you have, and then pour the boiling water over it after you put it in your little one-time tea bag here. And then try it by itself. And then if it's not sweet enough for you, add a little bit of sugar or whatever you like. And then again, increase or decrease the amount based on your taste preferences. It's totally up to you. I would love for you guys to give me feedback on how you liked both the afternoon and the bedtime tea after you try it, whether you send me an email afterwards or if you want to put it in the chat. I'm really interested to get your feedback to see how you liked it. If you thought it tasted good, if you thought it was too strong, too bitter, too whatever, I really would be interested. The bedtime tea has catmint in it, lemon balm, hops, and skullcap. And again, I just use equal parts. I thought this one was a little bit bitter. Again, probably coming from the hops, maybe a little bit from the skullcap as well. So if it's too bitter for you, you can add some sweetness to it, or we can reblend it and you can add more catmint or lemon balm to amp up that minty flavor or the lemon flavor. The reason I picked these are because the nervine and digestive actions of these plants make a soothing blend for tummy aches, for colds, for restlessness at bedtime. And I already have one user who tried some last night and said she and her mother both slept through the night for the first time for a long time. So it's like, yay. So I'm hoping you have the same experience. Catmint contains vitamins A, C, and K, as well as iron, manganese, and potassium. The lemon balm is high in flavonoids, and because it's a mint, it has an antioxidant effect. And the phytochemicals in the lemon balm may provide antioxidant activity, and its tannins contribute to antiviral effects. And again, this is all may because they still haven't done a ton of research on some of this stuff. Hops contain flavonoids and essential oils that have sedative properties. It's not just for beer anymore. It really is good to have in tea because it also has anti-inflammatory, anti-anxiety, and pain-relieving effects. And then last but not least, skullcap has been used for many centuries to reduce anxiety. It's a mild sedative, and it also has antibacterial and antiviral effects, and it's been used by Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine for a long, long time. So those are the four things in the bedtime tea recipe. So try one or the other. Maybe you want to try the bedtime tonight before you go to bed. Try the afternoon tea tomorrow, whatever works for you. But again, if you can let me know what you thought, I'd really be interested to hear. So I just want to thank you all for sharing a spot of tea with me. I've got herbs on my website, as I mentioned, on seedstoplate.com, and there's a list of the herbs you can get. I have one featured item that I want to tell you about called kale dust, which is kale. So it's a green, it's technically not an herb, but what I do is I dehydrate it and then grind it up fine. And this is a wonderful vitamin booster for your food. So you might not want to make tea out of it. You could certainly do that. But what I use it for is I add it to chili and spaghetti sauce and soup and basically anything else I'm cooking. I just put a little bit in. It really doesn't change the flavor of anything, but you're amping up the nutritional value of your food, whatever you're making. This is great for smoothies too. So if you're interested in this is on my website, along with a whole bunch of other herbs. And then I've got the two blends, the afternoon and the evening blended tea that you can also purchase. I hope everybody has a cup of tea and relaxes the rest of the evening. And again, any feedback you have on the tea flavors or things you like to drink for tea, let me know. And please check out my website if you get a chance.